Mark looked at me that night with eyes so cold it felt like I was sitting across from a stranger. In front of his powerful friends, he called me a disgrace and walked out, leaving me with the bill that could have ruined me. But instead of breaking, I held myself together, smiling as if his words had no weight. Deep down, though, I knew something had shifted. That night wasn't the first sign. For weeks, I had noticed the small things. Lipstick that wasn't mine, a hotel receipt tucked into his briefcase, late nights that didn't add up. My heart had been whispering the truth long before I let myself face it. And when I finally sat alone with that prenup, reading every word, I found something that made my pulse race. It was like holding a secret weapon I never thought I'd need. I didn't act right away. I played my part, silent and careful, gathering what I needed. Each smile I gave him at dinners, each nod of agreement, each quiet morning making his coffee. It was all a mask. Beneath it, I was building something step by step. A chance to turn his cruelty back on him, but in a way he'd never see coming. On my birthday, when he thought he'd broken me in front of everyone, I knew the time had come. I paid that bill with money he didn't even know I had, walked out with my head high, and let him think he'd won. What he didn't realize was that I was already holding every card that mattered. The next morning, his calls wouldn't stop. 23 times my phone lit up with his name. I didn't answer a single one. Because by then, I already knew his empire was about to crack. And this time, I wasn't the one left standing in the ruins. Mark's world was polished and cold, built on appearances and control. I lived inside it like a guest who was never truly welcome. The marble floors, the glass walls, the designer furniture. All of it looked perfect, yet nothing about it ever felt mine. Every morning I followed the same routine, careful not to disturb the order he demanded. Even the smallest detail, like how much foam sat on his coffee, could draw a sharp look or cutting remark. That morning, I had quietly hoped for something different. A sign that he remembered the day meant something to me. But as I set the cup in front of him, he didn't even raise his eyes. His only words were instructions about an evening I hadn't chosen, with people I didn't know, and a dress I never liked. In that moment, the weight of my place in his life pressed down harder than ever. I wasn't a wife in his eyes. I was a piece of his presentation, no different than the watch on his wrist or the car waiting downstairs. The silence between us stretched, thick and heavy. I wanted to ask if he had anything planned for me, but I already knew the answer. My birthday was not about me. It was about showing me off in the way that suited him best. It stung, yet I forced a calm face, the same way I always did. That had become my armor. Quiet acceptance that kept the peace, at least on the surface. While he scrolled through his phone, I studied him in a way I hadn't before. His sharp suit, the way his tie was already knotted perfectly, the faint cologne he wore. Everything was curated, everything designed to impress. But there was no warmth in any of it. No real care. Just polish. For years I told myself this was love, just a different kind. But deep inside, I could feel the cracks spreading. When he left for the office, the apartment was silent again. I stood in the middle of it, surrounded by luxury, but it felt like a museum I didn't belong to. I thought about the evening ahead, the way I would be seated quietly beside him, smiling at the right times, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, wearing the dress he preferred because he liked how it looked in photos. The thought drained me, but I couldn't let it show. I reminded myself to keep moving, to prepare for work, to focus on the small world that was mine alone. My classroom, my students, my friends at school. Those were the only places where I felt seen. The apartment, the dinners, the endless business circles, all of it belonged to Mark. And I was just another detail he controlled. Still, somewhere under the routine, a quiet thought lingered. A reminder that this wasn't how life was meant to be lived. And though I didn't know it then, that morning marked the beginning of an ending. One I hadn't dared to imagine, but one I was slowly learning to face. The moment I stepped into my classroom, the air felt lighter. The noise of children talking, laughing, and running around was a sharp contrast to the quiet, heavy atmosphere I had left behind at home. Instead of marble floors and cold walls, I was greeted by bright posters, messy desks, and the smell of crayons. My students didn't see me as someone to be controlled or displayed. To them, I was simply their teacher, and that meant everything to me. That morning, before I could even set down my bag, a group of them rushed up with wide smiles. They handed me cards made from folded paper, full of glitter, stickers, and words spelled the way only children could manage. One card had my name written 3 different ways. Another had hearts drawn over every inch. None of it was perfect, but it was real. Their excitement was genuine, and for the first time that day, I felt remembered. I thanked each of them, hugging those who practically jumped into my arms. The joy on their faces reminded me of the simple things that still mattered. I might have been invisible in my own home, but here, I was valued. Every smile, every laugh, every small voice calling out "Happy Birthday" meant more than any expensive dinner ever could. By lunchtime, the energy of the morning had settled, and I found myself in the break room with Lisa. She had been my closest friend since I started teaching, someone who could always sense when something was wrong. She slid a sandwich across the table to me and asked, almost casually, "So, what's Mark got planned for tonight?" I froze for a moment, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I knew exactly what it was. Nothing for me. Just another night serving his image, another gathering I hadn't chosen. I tried to smile, but my silence was louder than any words. Lisa studied me, her eyes soft, and she didn't push. She didn't need to. She understood. After lunch, I went back to the classroom, watching my students work on their reading assignments. Their little heads bent over books, their voices stumbling through sentences, their laughter when they got something wrong. It was ordinary, but it gave me peace. It reminded me of who I was outside of Mark's world. As I walked around the room, helping one child with a tricky word and another with a math problem, I felt a sense of grounding. Teaching had never been glamorous, but it had always been honest. There was no judgment here, no expectations beyond patience and care. It was a space where I could breathe. The day passed quickly, filled with small moments that stitched themselves into something bigger. A reminder that I wasn't completely lost. I had a place where I was wanted, a place where my voice mattered. And though I didn't say it out loud, I knew deep inside that these children, and the life I had built around them, were the only part of my world that truly felt real. It had started quietly, almost like a whisper in the back of my mind. For years I had trusted Mark without hesitation, never thinking to question his late nights or sudden trips. But one evening, while putting away his things, I noticed a folded slip of paper tucked inside his briefcase. At first I thought it was nothing, just another receipt, until I saw the name of the hotel printed at the top. He had sworn he was in Chicago that night, yet the charges were right here in black and white. An expensive dinner for two, a bottle of champagne, and a suite. My fingers trembled as I stared at the details, trying to convince myself there was an explanation. I told myself I was imagining things, but then I found more. A shirt tossed carelessly on the back of a chair had a faint smudge near the collar. Not makeup I owned, not a color I would ever choose. A dark plum stain, impossible to ignore, stared back at me like proof I didn't want to believe. I leaned closer, hoping it was something else. Wine maybe, or even ink, but it wasn't. The scent clinging to the fabric confirmed what my mind already feared. It was perfume, sharp and unfamiliar. My stomach turned as I snapped pictures, my hands unsteady. I didn't know why I was documenting it. Maybe because part of me already understood what was happening. Another part still clung to denial, searching for reasons that would make sense. Business dinners, laundry mistakes, coincidences. But deep down I knew better. Mark had been slipping away for months, and I had been too afraid to see it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake replaying every recent conversation. The vague answers, the sudden work trips, the way he avoided eye contact when I asked simple questions. Patterns I had brushed off now lined up in my head, like puzzle pieces, forming a picture I didn't want to face. The next morning, I moved through our routine as if nothing had changed. I made his coffee, packed his bag, and kissed him goodbye at the door. He smiled faintly, distracted, already glancing at his phone. I watched him leave, forcing myself to appear calm, though inside I felt hollow. After he was gone, I opened my drawer and placed the receipt and photos inside an envelope. I didn't know what I would do with them yet, but I knew I couldn't let them disappear. They were more than scraps of paper and stains. They were the first pieces of a truth I needed to prepare for. Walking into school later that day, I forced myself to focus on my students, their laughter and their lessons. But every quiet moment, my thoughts drifted back. The receipt, the lipstick, the lies. My chest tightened each time, a constant reminder that something was breaking, and it would only be a matter of time before the full picture revealed itself. The house was dark and still, but my mind refused to rest. I lay staring at the ceiling, thoughts chasing each other until I finally sat up, unable to fight the unease. Something kept pushing me toward Mark's office. It was a place I rarely stepped into, a room he guarded as if it held the core of his identity. That night, I turned on the small lamp and pulled open the drawer where I knew he kept important files. My hands shook as I sifted through folders of contracts, investment papers, and old correspondence. Buried between them was the document I had signed years earlier without hesitation, our prenuptial agreement. Back then, I had been too blinded by love, too eager to please, to look at it with clear eyes. I trusted him completely, never imagining I would need protection from the man I thought would cherish me. I sat at his desk, unfolding the pages carefully, reading each line as if I were decoding a secret. Most of it was standard legal language, words that blurred together, until one section made me stop. My pulse quickened. There it was, tucked in plain sight, something I had overlooked before, a clause that demanded loyalty and integrity. It stated that if either partner committed acts of dishonesty, adultery, fraud, or crimes involving money, they would forfeit everything. The guilty party would walk away with nothing. I read it twice, then a third time, making sure I wasn't misinterpreting it. My heart pounded so loudly it felt like it echoed in the silent room. It wasn't just a line of text, it was a key I hadn't realized I was holding. Memories rushed back of Mark bragging about how smart he was for insisting on that clause, his arrogance making it sound like he was untouchable. I remembered him saying I'd never have to worry because he would never break the vows that clause protected. And now the irony was almost unbearable. He had built his own trap without knowing it. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the papers spread across the desk. For the first time in weeks, the fear inside me was met with something else, a flicker of control. If the things I suspected turned out to be true, I wouldn't be powerless. His betrayal wouldn't just hurt me, it would cost him everything he valued. I folded the document neatly and placed it back where I found it, careful not to leave a trace. The lamp's glow felt harsher now, and I turned it off quickly before slipping out of the room. Walking back down the hallway, the weight in my chest was heavy, but it was different. I wasn't just a bystander anymore. As I lay back in bed, staring into the darkness, the discovery played over in my head. The receipt, the lipstick, the lies, they all pointed to the truth I dreaded. And now I knew that if I ever had to face it fully, I wouldn't be defenseless. Hidden in those pages was my shield, and perhaps my only chance at freedom. The workshop had nothing to do with my personal life. It was meant to be about teaching methods, strategies for keeping kids engaged, and ways to handle classroom challenges. I went because it was expected, but my mind was far away, clouded with everything happening at home. I must have looked distracted, because when I met Chloe during a break, she studied me longer than most people do. She was friendly, easy to talk to, and something in her sharp eyes told me she noticed what others missed. She asked a few simple questions, nothing invasive, yet I found myself giving answers that hinted at the weight I carried. She didn't pry, but there was a pause, and then she said quietly, almost as if she was speaking from experience, "If you feel something is wrong, it usually is. People who act untouchable are often the ones hiding the most." She slipped a card into my hand, introducing herself as a forensic accountant. "If you ever need clarity, call me," she added. I tucked her card into my notebook, unsure if I would ever use it. Part of me thought I was overreacting, that maybe I was inventing problems because I felt unloved. Still, the card stayed with me like a lifeline, a reminder that someone outside my world could see through the cracks. A week later, I couldn't ignore the gnawing in my chest anymore. The sleepless nights, the questions without answers, the documents I had hidden away, they all pushed me to reach out. We met in a quiet cafe, tucked into a corner where no one could overhear us. Chloe listened carefully as I explained the pieces I had found, her expression steady, not surprised. When I finished, she pulled her laptop closer and spoke with a calm certainty that unnerved me. "If you're ready, I can look deeper. But you need to be prepared for what I might find." I nodded, though my stomach twisted. Part of me still clung to hope that I was wrong, that everything could somehow be explained away. But within minutes, as she traced transactions and balances, that hope unraveled. She turned her screen toward me, showing withdrawals I had never made, transfers I couldn't account for, and a pattern that was impossible to deny. Thousands had been slipping from our accounts into one I had never seen before. The numbers blurred as I stared at them, my throat tightening. Chloe placed her hand gently on mine. "This isn't a mistake. He's been hiding it deliberately." Her words hit harder than I expected, even after everything I had already suspected. It wasn't just betrayal of love anymore. It was theft, deceit written in cold, unfeeling numbers. I sat there frozen, my coffee untouched, realizing how little control I had actually had in my own marriage. When I left the cafe, the air outside felt sharper. I walked slowly, clutching the folder of evidence she had prepared for me. Every step felt heavier, but also clearer. The truth was no longer just suspicion. It was real, documented, undeniable. And from that moment, I knew nothing in my life with Mark could ever return to what it once was. That evening, I stood in front of my closet longer than usual. Rows of dresses Mark had chosen for me hung neatly, their price tags still etched in my mind. But I reached for the one thing he would never have picked, the green dress I bought with my own money, soft and modest, but mine. When I slipped it on, I felt a small spark of control. I wasn't stepping out as his ornament that night. I was going as myself. The restaurant was crowded, alive with voices and clinking glasses, yet when I walked in with him, all I could feel was the tension beneath my skin. The table was already arranged, every seat filled with people I barely knew. Business partners, wealthy couples, faces I recognized only from stories Mark told. And right beside him sat Jessica, the young associate who had become a little too familiar in his life. She leaned close to him, her laughter spilling out like she wanted the entire room to notice. I caught the faint scent before I even sat down. Plum, sharp and unmistakable. It was the same fragrance that had lingered on his clothes weeks before. My stomach tightened, but I kept my expression calm. If anyone looked my way, they wouldn't see the storm inside me. They would see a wife politely smiling, playing her role. The dinner stretched on, filled with conversation that revolved around profits, deals, and travel plans. Mark thrived in this space, his voice louder than anyone else's, his stories exaggerated for effect. Every laugh he pulled from Jessica made his confidence grow, and I knew he was putting on a show not just for them, but for me. He wanted me to notice. He wanted me to feel small in comparison to the attention she gave him. I sat quietly, cutting into my food, nodding when people included me in the conversation. On the surface, I was the picture of composure. Inside, I was counting moments, holding steady, waiting for what I sensed was inevitable. Mark had a habit of turning evenings into performances, and tonight was no different. When the wine was poured and the desserts arrived, his voice grew sharper. I could see it in the way he glanced at me, as if daring me to react. Jessica leaned in closer, brushing his arm as if she belonged there. The others around the table laughed, some uncomfortably, some out of obligation. Through it all, I kept my eyes forward, listening more than I spoke, storing every detail. My silence wasn't weakness, it was patience. Mark thought I was sitting in ignorance, pretending not to see. What he didn't know was that I had already decided. I wasn't there to compete with his arrogance or to beg for dignity. I was there to let him reveal himself in full, so when the moment finally came, I would be ready. By the time he prepared to deliver his cruel finale, I was no longer afraid. I was calm, steady, almost detached, because the stage wasn't his anymore. It was mine. The words Mark hurled at me cut through the air sharper than the clink of glasses around us. His voice was loud enough for every guest to hear, his insults deliberate, designed to strip me of dignity in front of the people he admired most. Then, without hesitation, he rose from his chair, tossed his napkin onto the table, and strode out as if leaving me behind were nothing. The echo of his steps faded, but the weight of what he had done hung over the room like smoke. For a moment, no one spoke. Forks hovered mid-air, conversations died, and eyes flicked toward me with discomfort. Some looked away quickly, others lingered, curious to see how I would react. I felt their stares, but I refused to break. Instead, I straightened my back, my expression calm, and asked quietly for the bill. My voice was steady, even though my chest ached with humiliation. When Robert, the maitre d', approached, his face carried something I hadn't seen all evening, kindness. His eyes softened as he placed the check gently in front of me, as though hoping the gesture would ease the sting of the number printed there. $4,000. Enough to make anyone flinch. He hesitated, beginning to say something, but I cut him off with a small shake of my head. I wasn't going to allow pity. From my purse, I slid out the card I had hidden away for months. A card Mark didn't know existed, one I had opened in preparation for moments just like this. My hand didn't tremble as I set it on the tray. The machine beeped, the receipt printed, and the transaction was done. I had paid the price of his cruelty, but on my own terms. The guests shifted uncomfortably as I rose from my chair. Some tried to smile politely, Others avoided meeting my eyes altogether. Their discomfort no longer mattered to me. The performance Mark had staged had ended, and I refused to be his victim. I gathered my things, lifted my chin, and walked toward the exit with quiet dignity. At the door, Robert caught my attention. He slipped a small card into my palm, leaning close enough that only I could hear him. "If you ever need a witness," he murmured. His words were gentle, not forced, carrying the weight of someone who had seen everything and understood more than he could say aloud. I nodded once, my throat tight with unspoken gratitude, and tucked the card safely away. Stepping outside, the night air wrapped around me, cool and still. The city lights shimmered across the street, but inside me, something had shifted. I wasn't crushed by his attempt to shame me. If anything, I felt stronger. He had tried to leave me broken in front of everyone, yet I had walked out with control he didn't realize I had. For the first time in a long while, I knew the story wasn't going to end the way he planned. It was only just beginning. I drove to my sister's place that night, the weight of everything finally pushing me forward. Chloe was already there, papers spread out across the dining table, her sharp eyes scanning every line. Together, we organized it all, bank statements showing the hidden transfers, screenshots of the hotel charges, even the photos of the lipstick-stained collar. Then came Robert's statement, written in careful words that described exactly what he had witnessed at the restaurant. Piece by piece, the story of Mark's double life was sealed tight in a folder that couldn't be ignored. We didn't stop there. Chloe guided me step by step, making sure the evidence reached the right places. Copies went to the IRS and the SEC, agencies that didn't overlook missing funds or fraud. Another packet was prepared for his business partners and top clients. Every single person who trusted him with money or reputation would see the truth for themselves. My hands shook slightly when I sealed the envelopes, not from fear, but from the finality of it. Once sent, there would be no undoing. By morning, the fallout had already begun. My phone lit up with calls, one after another, all from Mark. The first were angry, his voice sharp, demanding explanations as if he still had control. When I didn't answer, his tone shifted. The messages turned frantic, filled with curses and threats, then quiet pleas. He begged me to listen, swore I was ruining his life, tried to twist it into my fault. But I kept the phone face down on the counter, his words dissolving into the background noise they had always been. News traveled quickly. His firm called an emergency meeting. Federal agents moved in, freezing accounts and flagging transactions. Clients who once praised him now pulled away, unwilling to risk their own names. His polished mask cracked in public view, the perfect image he had built crumbling under the weight of his own arrogance. Everything he used to belittle me, his wealth, his influence, his power, slipped through his fingers in a matter of hours. I didn't feel joy in watching him fall, not the kind he might have expected. What I felt was release. For years, he had told me I was nothing without him, that I should be grateful for what little he offered. Yet here he was, the man who dismissed me as small, now stripped of everything. And there I stood, stronger, unbroken, carrying proof that his empire had always been built on lies. That evening, I sat quietly at my sister's kitchen table, the same folder of evidence now resting in a drawer. My phone buzzed again with his name flashing across the screen. I let it ring, my heart steady. The man who once tried to control every detail of my life was no longer a force I feared. His downfall wasn't revenge. It was simply the truth catching up to him. And for the first time in a long time, I could finally breathe without his shadow over me. The legal process moved faster than I imagined. Mark, once so sure of himself, had no room to fight. The documents we filed stood firm, and the clause he had insisted on years ago turned against him. By the time the judge signed the final papers, it was clear he had nothing left to claim. For the first time in a long while, I felt a door closing without regret. I packed my things from the apartment that had always felt like a showroom instead of a home. The marble floors and endless glass walls never brought me comfort. They were only reminders of how little I belonged in his world. Carrying out each box, I realized I didn't need luxury to breathe freely. A modest place near my school was waiting, and when I opened the door, it felt more mine than that penthouse ever had. The walls were bare, the rooms small, but the silence was gentle, not heavy. Monday morning came with the rhythm I knew best. Walking into the school building, I carried my lesson plans under my arm, heart steady in a way it hadn't been in months. As I reached my classroom, the sight stopped me. A handmade banner stretched across the doorway. "Welcome back, Ms. Evans." Bright letters, unevenly cut, taped together with more love than skill. The laughter of children spilled into the hall, and in that moment, the weight of the past months lifted. Inside, the desks were covered with small cards and drawings. Glitter stuck to my hands as I picked one up, the words spelled imperfectly but full of care. These children didn't measure my worth by money, clothes, or the man I stood beside at dinner tables. To them, I was simply their teacher, the one who read stories, answered questions, and believed in them. Their smiles were more powerful than any applause Mark ever chased. That day, I taught as if nothing had broken me, but inside, I knew I was standing taller. Every choice I had made led me back here, to a place where I wasn't diminished or controlled. My strength wasn't in tearing Mark apart. It was in refusing to let him erase who I was. His downfall was his own doing. My victory was reclaiming my life. When the last bell rang and the children rushed out, I stayed a little longer in the quiet room. The banner still hung above the door, swaying gently as the air shifted. I whispered my own name, Ms. Evans, letting it settle in my chest. It wasn't tied to him anymore. It was mine, fully mine, and it carried no shame. Walking out of the school that evening, the sky turning gold, I finally felt what freedom meant. Not a dramatic triumph, not a loud declaration, just the quiet certainty that I had survived, rebuilt, and chosen myself. That was the real ending, the one I had been waiting for all along. Do you believe I was right to cut Mark out of my life completely and reclaim my freedom? Or should I have stayed and fought for a broken marriage? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm eager to know your view. And if you want more gripping stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you're always the first to watch.